Hi, welcome back to Nasha's Art. Today I will show you how to use warm colours on the colour wheel to create a sunset or sunrise silhouetted cityscape. We'll be using watercolours and we'll be layering a watercolour wash first, on top of which we will create our silhouette cityscape. So I hope you love it. To create this piece of artwork, you basically need a few things. You'll need a palette, a fat watercolour brush or mop brush, your pot of water, some sort of tissue, your paper, or if you don't have watercolour paper you can use card. And to be honest, the technique is pretty similar whether you're using top of the range kind of Daniel Smith watercolour paints or more basic range like the Reeves, or a mid-range like your Winsor & Newton, sort of mid-top range. Firstly, we need to make a bank of the colours we want to make our wash. So I'm going to start with my basic range and use the Reeves, and I'm going to get my brush. I'm going to add a bit of just blank water, plain water, to the palette. I'm now going to spend a little while in the paint, gently brushing the paint to pick up the pigment. I'm already needing to add more water, as you can see, and I'm going to continue picking up more pigment. I don't want a mild colour, I want quite a rich colour. You can see that's not quite rich enough yet, it's still quite watery, so I'm going to go back in and pick a bit more colour up. You can even twist the brush around so it picks up colour on all the different sides. And if I wipe it, that colour already does look a bit thicker. I'm going to pick one more bit of colour up. So I really want it to be so rich. Okay, so I've got my bank of colour. Let's have a start with a watercolour wash. I'm going to move from left to right and move down the page as I go. Picking my colour up, and I'm using the brush not at a 90-degree angle to the paper, but more almost level with the paper. And I'm going to move swiftly down, pulling that colour as I go. It's easier if you tip the paper. I could have my book flat, but I've tipped it and it helps, the gravity pulls the paint down. So that is a useful tip if you can do that. So I have one simple colour in this watercolour wash. What if I wanted to do a couple of colours? Let's say I wanted to do a sunset. I'm going to add to this bank of colour and I'm going to make another maybe brighter red here. So let's add to this colour first, because we don't want to run out of the original colour we were using. There we are. I'm going to try and wipe as much paint off the brush so I don't waste it. And now I'm going to go ahead and add some blank water to this palette, because this is going to be my bright red. I'm going to spend a bit of time in that red, picking up the pigment, twisting the brush gently in there. And you can see that's quite pale. I want to add more. I need more pigment in there. We want it as rich as possible. So it takes a little time, but it's worth it in the end. It's getting better, still not enough. Go back into that paint and patiently pick up a bit more pigment. It's getting much better. Touch more. You can see my colours running out. It's obviously a popular colour with me. Okay, so I want my new wash to start with orange and then move to this deeper red, sort of sunset-like. I'm going to start on this side and I'm going to move gently from left to right. So let's pick up that orange first. I'm moving gently from left to right, and we're going to dip my paint in the other red, and it will mix with the orange a bit. I'm going to continue to go down, dip it again. And you can see it's beginning to turn that more red colour. To be honest, it didn't blend that well there, probably picked a bit too much off. But there's always room for improvement whenever we do anything. How about 3 colours this time? Maybe I want a bit of yellow in this sunset wash that I'm creating. So I'm going to stay a little bit of a while in the yellow. I'm going to make a bank of yellow here. Pick up as much pigment as I can. And it's always good to practice watercolour washes and plan the colours you want and think about how you want them to grade down the page. Do you want it to go from yellow to orange to red, or do you want it to go red, orange, yellow? It's a good idea to think ahead. So this time I'm going to start with the yellow. It's quite pale, but if I add a bit more, it gets a bit brighter. Moving gently from left to right, guiding the paint down as I go. I'm going to dip just a piece of my brush in the orange, because this time I want it to be a bit better blended than the other one I made up there. Dip a bit more of my brush in that orange, all of my brush in the orange. I'm going to dip a corner of my brush in the red. Ooh, that was quite a lot of red, that. More of my brush in the red. And there we have a bit more of a blended sunset watercolour wash. I've got my paper landscape, and I'm now going to do my actual watercolour wash that will go behind my silhouette. So I'm starting with quite a bright pinky red, and I've added a little bit more of the warm red as I'm going down the page. I'm gently brushing the page from left to right as we did before, and now I'm adding just a touch of the yellow, which you can see is turning the red into a more of an orange. You can see I keep flicking because there's a little bit of brush hair that has got trapped on my page. Adding more yellow now, swishing it across. And unfortunately at this point I run out of yellow. So this is a lesson for making sure you have enough paint made in your palette bank. Don't be like me and run out of paint. As I finish it off, I'm going towards a lighter yellow with more water added. And this should make the silhouette of my city really stand out when it's placed at the bottom on this yellow colour. I loved also using gravity to help some of the wetter paint drip down the page. You can see here it's begun to spread into other colours, and it's kind of a bit cloud-like and adds a bit of fun detail. To create your skyline, it would be good to find pictures of silhouettes of your favourite city and sketch those and practice first before you have a go over your watercolour wash. So one of my favourite cities to sketch is the Dubai skyline. It's full of these modern but really quite beautifully made buildings, and the very tops of some of those skyscrapers have unique little embellishments that really make them stand out and look really quite pretty. So you can see here I'm using a small little kind of ruler or measuring tool. It's probably easier to use a smaller one than a large ruler because you can swivel it round quickly. And I'm using a picture of the silhouette of Dubai, and I'm sort of focusing on my main key famous buildings of Dubai and filling in other buildings in between. So it's definitely worth getting up a picture of a silhouette of the famous buildings of whatever city you have chosen, whether it's London, Copenhagen, etc. The other thing that's important is if you're not confident working straight in pen, then do sketch it out in pencil first, particularly when you get to doing this on your actual watercolour wash. So work in pencil first if you're more comfortable with it, and then you can go over it in pen afterwards. Once you've got your skyline drawn in, there's several options in terms of how to make it a silhouette. You could simply use black paint and paint it on. So whatever black paint you like, it could be watercolour, or you could even use acrylic or poster paint. The other option can be that for the very fine details where you're concerned about your brush going over the edge, you can fill those in with a marker pen. It would need to be waterproof if you're going to then use watercolour for the thicker bits. So I've used marker pen for the really tricky bits, and then I can fill in the central bits with my paint. So you can use, in other words, a combination of waterproof black pen and watercolour paint, or whatever paint you want. Something to bear in mind if you're using watercolour to do your silhouette is that you may require 2 layers. Sometimes the watercolour wash of red and yellows underneath the black kind of show through a little bit. So by waiting for the first layer to dry and then doing another layer of black on top, it gets that real rich kind of depth to it and looks a lot better. I hope you loved this tutorial and enjoyed learning these tips and tricks in watercolour. If you did, I've got another great fun tutorial called Watercolour Techniques with Salt and Coffee, and that builds on the skills of doing a watercolour wash but explores the effects that are created when you drop salt on it or when you drop coffee granules on it, and it's very exciting and gives you some marvellous textures, so do check out that tutorial. Otherwise, please do like and subscribe, and add a comment in the comments below if you enjoyed this.